They say every woman remembers her wedding night. For me, it wasn't the champagne on ice, or the roses scattered across the hotel suite. It wasn't even the diamond ring glinting on my finger like a small burning sun. It was the weight of a secret pressing against my chest as I lay beside the man who had promised me the world. Michael Hayes wasn't just any man. He was a 4-star general, a war hero, whose name commanded respect in every corner of the country. He was older than me by 15 years, with silver threads in his hair, and a presence that filled every room he entered. To the outside world, he was untouchable. To me, lying here in silk sheets that smelled faintly of his cologne, he felt terrifyingly close. I stared at the ceiling, my hands clasped together tightly on my stomach. My heart raced in a way I couldn't control. Because tonight, he'd find out. He'd find out I had never been with a man before him, that I had guarded my body and my heart for 25 years, waiting for someone who felt safe. And Michael. He felt safe and dangerous all at once. What I didn't know, what I couldn't even begin to imagine, was that he had a secret too, one that would shatter everything between us. But that night, in the quiet of our honeymoon suite, I didn't see the storm coming. I only felt the warmth of his hand as it brushed against mine, and the tremor in my voice as I whispered, "Michael, there's something I need to tell you." I still remember the first time I saw him. It was late autumn at Fort Brenton, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine trees outside the military hospital. I was in my scrub's hair, tied back in a messy bun, trying to ignore the ache in my feet after a 12-hour shift. He came in with 2 aides flanking him, his crisp uniform immaculate, despite the faint smear of blood on his sleeve, a deep cut along his forearm. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to bring a 4-star general into my care. "General Hayes?" I asked, glancing at his chart. He looked at me, then really looked. There was something in his eyes, a calmness, that made me straighten my back without meaning to. "That's me," he said, his voice smooth, warm like whiskey on a winter night. "But you can call me Michael." I didn't. "This will sting a little," I murmured, cleaning the wound with practiced hands. "Not my first scar," he replied with a faint smile. "Won't be my last." I focused on my work, refusing to be drawn into conversation. Generals weren't new to me. I'd patched up enough high-ranking men to know their charm could be as dangerous as any battlefield. But this one was different. When I finished, he flexed his fingers experimentally. "You're good at this," he said softly. "Years of practice. You must be exhausted." I manage. Then he did something unexpected. "Let me buy you a coffee. As a thank you." I paused, meeting his gaze for the first time. His eyes were steady, almost kind. But I knew better. "I appreciate the offer, General," I said evenly, "but I don't mix work and anything else." His lips curved in what might have been a smirk or a challenge. "Fair enough, Miss Bennet." I thought that would be the end of it, that he'd walk out and forget my name by morning. But as he left, he glanced back, once eyes catching mine, in a way that sent an unexpected jolt through my chest. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the spark that would ignite everything. 2 nights later, Michael sat slouched in a leather armchair at the Fort Brenton Officers' Club, a half-empty glass of bourbon in his hand. The room was warm, smoky, filled with the murmur of men who'd seen too many wars and drank too much to forget them. But Michael wasn't drinking to forget. "She turned me down," he said flatly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Across from him, Colonel James Whittaker raised an eyebrow. turned you down, you. Michael's jaw tensed. Didn't even blink. No smile. No polite excuse. Just a straight no. James smirked. Maybe she's not impressed by medals and stars. That's the thing, Michael murmured. She's different. Or maybe you're just not used to hearing no. James countered, leaning back. Michael stared into his glass, then let out a humorless laugh. 6 months. What? 6 months, he repeated louder this time. I'll make Clara Bennett fall so hard she won't know which way is up. And when she does, she'll have my name. Hayes. 6 months, Jim. James sat forward, his expression sharpening. You're joking. Michael's lips curved into a cold, determined smile. I never joke about winning. Michael. James sighed heavily, rubbing his temple. This isn't a mission. This is a woman's heart. Don't make a battlefield out of it. Michael's gaze hardened. Everything is a mission. You're going to get yourself burned, James warned quietly, but Michael didn't respond. He drained the rest of his bourbon and motioned for another, his mind already racing ahead. It wasn't about Clara anymore. It was about pride, about proving that no one could resist him, not even a woman like her. That night, back in his quarters, Michael sat alone in the dim glow of his desk lamp. The silence pressed heavy against him, broken only by the soft clink of his medals as he set them on the polished oak. Bronze star, silver star, purple heart, symbols of battles fought and won. But none of those victories mattered now, because somewhere out there was a woman who had looked him in the eye and said no. No. The word repeated in his head like the crack of a gunshot. He traced a finger along the edge of his 4-star insignia jaw, tightening. Clara Bennett. Young, smart, untouched by the darkness of his world. She wasn't like the others, and maybe that was why he couldn't stop thinking about her. Michael wasn't used to being denied. He wasn't used to losing. This isn't about her, he whispered to himself. It's about me. It started as pride, a wounded ego, but as he stared at the framed photograph of his unit on the wall, something deeper coiled inside him. Obsession. He opened his leather-bound notebook and began to write. Dinners, gifts, strategic encounters. He mapped out every step like a campaign plan. 6 months, he muttered under his breath. She'll be mine. But even then he didn't realize the cost of winning a heart you don't yet understand. 2 days later, a bouquet of deep red roses arrived at the nurse's station. Clara Bennett, the delivery man said, holding out the extravagant arrangement. A white envelope was tucked neatly between the blooms. The nurses around me gasped softly. Whoa, Clara, one of them teased. Someone's trying hard. I stared at the flowers for a long moment, then reached for the card. Every warrior needs a moment of peace. Let me offer you one. M.H. Michael Hayes. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but not from flattery. He thought he could win me over with roses. You're sending those back? Right, asked Maria, the head nurse, her eyes glinting. Of course. I scribbled a note on a small slip of paper, folded it in half, and tucked it back into the envelope before handing the entire bouquet to the delivery man. Return this to the sender, I said firmly, and make sure he gets this. The young man hesitated, glancing between me and the flowers. You sure? Most women. I'm not most women, I cut him off. As he left with the rejected bouquet, I could feel the curious stares from my coworkers. You really aren't tempted. A 4-star general sending you flowers? Maria asked later in the break room. No, I replied simply. He doesn't know me, and I don't want to be another story he tells in bars. But as much as I tried to stay unaffected, part of me felt unsettled. Not because of the roses, because I had a sense he wasn't going to stop, and deep down, I wondered if I would stay strong enough to keep resisting. It was raining that afternoon when I stepped out of the hospital. The parking lot was nearly empty, puddles shimmering under the dim streetlights. I pulled my coat tighter, eager to get home and leave the long shift behind me. Then I saw him, Michael Hayes, leaning against a black SUV, hands in the pockets of his military jacket, rain dripping from his graying hair. He straightened when he saw me, and for a moment I thought he might finally leave. But he didn't. "Clara," he said, his voice deep but soft, as though afraid I'd bolt. I stopped in my tracks. "General Hayes, what are you doing here? I've been waiting. For how long? 3 hours." I blinked. 3 hours. In the rain, I didn't mind. He held up a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I wanted to give you this." I hesitated. "I don't need gifts." "It's not a gift. It's a book. Combat Medicine, The Untold Stories. You mentioned last time that you wanted to understand military trauma cases better." I frowned. "You remember that? Of course I do." The rain kept falling, drumming steadily on the hood of his car. I wanted to stay angry, to shut him down completely. But the truth was, no one had ever waited in the rain for me. No one had ever listened so closely to an offhand comment. "Clara," he said again, his voice lower now, almost vulnerable. "I know you told me no. I'm not here to push. Just let me do one thing right." I exhaled slowly, torn between irritation and something warmer I didn't want to name. I reached out and took the book. "Thank you," I said softly. He smiled faintly, but there was no triumph in it, only relief. That's all I needed. Then he opened the car door, climbed in, and drove away. I stood there in the rain for a long time, staring down at the book in my hands. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd misjudged him. When the invitation came, I almost threw it away. Annual Fort Brenton Christmas Gala. The embossed card read, "Officers, nurses, and staff were all invited." I'd avoided these events for years. They always felt like an obligation wrapped in too much champagne and forced laughter. But this time, something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the book still sitting on my nightstand. Or maybe it was Michael Hayes' steady, unflinching gaze when he asked, "Will you come?" So I went. The hall was warm, strung with garlands and twinkling lights. Laughter and music floated through the air as I slipped inside, clinging to the edges of the room. I spotted Michael almost immediately, surrounded by junior officers. But he wasn't commanding the room the way I expected. He was laughing, not the rehearsed politician's laugh I'd heard before, but something softer. He was helping a young private adjust his tie, listening intently to a corporal talk about her family back home. For the first time, I saw him not as a general, not as the man who'd waited hours in the rain for me, but as someone human. "Clara," he said, when he noticed me crossing the room with surprising ease. "You came. I didn't plan to stay long," I replied. "That's fair," he said gently. "But I'm glad you're here." There was no arrogance in his tone, no pressure, just gratitude. And as he led me toward the buffet, keeping a respectful distance, asking about my favorite holiday traditions, I felt something in me shift. Maybe he wasn't playing a game anymore. Maybe neither of us was. The cold night air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of the officers' hall, the echo of music and laughter still faint behind me. I walked slowly, my heels clicking against the wet pavement. Snow flurries drifted down, catching in my hair. I should have felt relieved to leave. That was my plan. Show up, smile politely, and get out before anyone could ask too many questions. But instead, my chest felt warm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about my long shifts at the hospital, or the endless stream of patients whose names I never remembered long enough. I was thinking about him, the way he'd listened to that young soldier talk about his newborn daughter, the way he'd insisted the last slice of pie go to the corporal who looked homesick. Michael Hayes, the man I thought I'd figured out, seemed so different tonight. And as I pulled my coat tighter, I caught myself wondering, what if he's not pretending? The thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit, because I wasn't sure which possibility scared me more, that he was still playing a game, or that he wasn't. The wind was sharp that morning, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold earth. I didn't know why I'd agreed to come. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet persistence in Michael's voice when he asked Will, "You let me show you a place that means something to me." We walked side by side through Arlington National Cemetery, rows upon rows of white headstones stretching endlessly into the horizon. Michael's hands were in his coat pockets, his eyes scanning the names carved into the marble markers. "They were just kids," he said softly. His voice was different here, not the confident, commanding tone of a 4-star general. It was quieter, heavy. I glanced at him, but he wasn't looking at me. When I signed my first command order, he continued, "I thought I understood the cost. But nothing prepares you for standing in front of grieving parents, telling them their son or daughter isn't coming home." The air seemed to thicken between us. "This place reminds me," he said after a pause, "that all my stars and medals, they're not victories. They're reminders of every life I couldn't save." I didn't know what to say. I'd only ever seen Michael Hayes as untouchable, a man of power and pride. But standing here among the rows of fallen soldiers, he seemed smaller somehow. Human. "Thank you for bringing me here," I whispered. He looked at me then, and for the first time, there was no trace of the man who had waited in the rain or sent flowers. There was only a man carrying ghosts, and against my better judgment, I felt my walls begin to crack. The coffee shop was small, tucked between 2 brick buildings on a quiet street. It wasn't the kind of place I imagined a 4-star general would choose. No stiff waiters, no polished silver, just mismatched chairs and the soft hum of an old record player. Michael was already there when I arrived, seated by the window with 2 mugs in front of him. "You came," he said, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "You asked," I replied, simply hanging my coat on the back of the chair. For the first few minutes, we sat in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken questions. Then slowly, the conversation began to flow. But this time, something was different. Michael didn't talk about strategy or politics. He didn't try to impress me with war stories. Instead, he asked about me. "What made you choose nursing?" I hesitated, surprised. I guess. I wanted to fix what I couldn't in my own family. He nodded, listening intently, not like a man waiting to speak, but like someone who truly wanted to understand. When I asked about him, he looked down at his coffee, swirling the dark liquid. I spent so long being a general, I forgot how to just be Michael. The vulnerability in his voice startled me. I'd expected arrogance, command, control. But here was a man stripped of his stars sitting across from me like any other, unsure of how to reach the woman he wanted. When we stepped outside, later snowflakes clung to his dark coat. He paused, brushing one from my hair, with a gentleness that caught me off guard. "You deserve someone who listens, Clara. I want to be that man. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. Maybe. Just maybe. He already was. The living room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the Christmas tree casting golden reflections across the hardwood floor. It was quiet, almost too quiet, just the crackle of the fireplace, and the faint hum of an old holiday tune playing from Michael's phone. "Clara?" he said, his voice breaking the stillness. I turned from the tree, clutching the small mug of cocoa he'd made. Yes. He stood there in his dress shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, a nervous energy radiating from him, something I'd never seen before. "I know this wasn't how you imagined Christmas," he began, but I couldn't wait. I frowned, slightly confused. Wait for what? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. "This isn't about grand gestures or timing," he said quietly. "It's about you. You walked into my life and reminded me what it means to feel human again. I don't want to let that go." He sank to one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band. "Clara Reynolds, will you marry me?" The room felt impossibly still. My heart pounded, emotions tangling, fear, surprise, and something softer, warmer, rising above them all. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder, surer, "Yes, Michael." His relief was almost palpable as he stood slipping the ring onto my trembling finger. When he pulled me into his arms, the world outside seemed to disappear. For that moment, it was just the two of us, and the quiet promise of a future neither of us had planned for, but both suddenly wanted more than anything. I said yes. Yes to the man who'd once seemed untouchable. Yes to the man who stood in front of me that night, not as a general, not as someone with medals and stars, but as Michael. He made me believe in something I thought I'd outgrown, the idea that love could feel safe. I didn't care that it happened fast. I didn't care what people might say, because in that moment I felt chosen. Now as I sit in our honeymoon suite, the ring still warm on my finger, I keep replaying his words in my mind. "You reminded me how to be human." I believe him. At least I want to. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was the secret he carried into this marriage. The bet, the careless, drunken promise he once made that I'd have his name in 6 months. And tonight, as I prepare to tell him something I've never told anyone, I have no idea that his secret might break me first. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and hibiscus as I stood on the balcony staring at the endless blue. Below, waves kissed the Maui shoreline in a soft, rhythmic lullaby. This was supposed to feel perfect. I had everything: the ring, the vows, the man every woman in the room had envied as I walked down the aisle. Yet my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Inside, Michael was unpacking our bags, humming low under his breath. He seemed happy, relaxed. I wished I felt the same. Tonight wasn't just any night. It was our first as husband and wife, and with every passing hour, the weight of what I hadn't told him pressed heavier on my chest. I'd rehearsed the words 100 times. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you." But every time the fear tightened my throat. What if he laughed? Or worse, what if he looked at me differently? Like I was naive, fragile, not the woman he thought he'd married Clara. His voice broke my thoughts. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, shirt sleeves rolled barefoot on the polished wood floor. There was no rank in his stance, no stars on his shoulders, just Michael. "You've been quiet all day," he said gently. "Are you nervous?" I forced a small smile. A little. If only he knew. because while I thought I was preparing for a night of intimacy, I had no idea Michael was hiding something too, a secret far heavier than mine. And soon, both truths would collide. The soft glow of candlelight filled the room, flickering against the cream-colored walls. Michael had thought of every detail. Rose petals scattered across the bed, a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket. Even my favorite jazz song playing low in the background. It should have felt romantic, but my stomach churned as he stepped closer, his hand brushing my arm. "Clara," he said softly, "you're trembling." I tried to steady my breath. My fingers gripped the edge of my silk robe as I searched for courage. "There's something I need to tell you," I whispered. He stilled. "What is it?" I stared at the floor, heat rushing to my cheeks. You'll be my first." Silence. The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. Michael didn't move, didn't breathe. For a split second his eyes widened, not from the revelation itself, but from what he thought it meant. She knows. The blood drained from his face. His heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the jazz music. But then her next words shattered his assumption. "I've never been with anyone because I wanted to be sure. About love, about trust, about the man I give myself to." She looked up, then her eyes glassy but steady. "And I'm sure about you, Michael." Relief washed over him in a violent, almost painful wave. She didn't know. She didn't know about the bet that had started it all. Yet guilt curled like smoke in his chest, bitter and suffocating. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing a smile. "Clara," he murmured, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm honored, and I promise you tonight isn't about expectations. It's about us." Her lips trembled into a small smile as she leaned into his touch. But as he kissed her slow and tender, Michael's mind was anything but calm. She had given him her trust, her innocence, and he had come into this marriage on a lie. The room was still. Clara lay beside me, her breathing soft and steady. Her face turned toward mine in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. A faint smile lingered on her lips, even in sleep. She looked peaceful, pure. I, on the other hand, felt anything but. I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight, with a weight I couldn't shake. She gave me her heart, and I gave her a lie. A single tear slid down the side of my face. I wiped it away before it could fall onto the pillow, as if that could erase the shame clawing at me. I thought back to the night in the officers' club, how easily the words had left my mouth drunk on whiskey and pride. 6 months. She'll carry my name. It had been a game then, a challenge to my ego after she'd brushed me off with those clear, steady eyes. Now those same eyes haunted me. She trusted me enough to give me everything, and I couldn't even trust her with the truth. I turned on my side to watch her sleep. One hand rested near her cheek, her ring catching the light with every slow rise and fall of her chest. I wanted to protect this woman more than anything, but how could I protect her from the one person who had hurt her most? Me. The sun had barely risen over the horizon, spilling gold across the waves outside our bungalow. Clara stirred beside me, her hand instinctively reaching for mine in her sleep. I closed my fingers around hers, holding on like a drowning man clutching driftwood. If only she knew. If she knew the truth about how this all began. The drunken words, the careless bet I'd lose her. She'd see me for what I really was back then. Not a man worthy of her trust. Not a man worthy of her love. I traced the outline of her ring with my thumb, my chest tightening. Clara had given me a gift I didn't deserve: her heart, her faith, her first moments of intimacy. And all the while, a shadow lingered at the edges of this paradise. The bet. A secret coiled like a snake, ready to strike and destroy everything we'd built. The call came in the middle of the afternoon. Michael had stepped out to meet a visiting officer at the resort's bar, leaving me alone on the balcony with my coffee and the warm Maui breeze. When I answered, it was Captain Reynolds, one of his long-time colleagues. "Clara, hey, congratulations again. Didn't think the General would actually pull it off." "Pull what off?" I asked, lightly swirling the coffee in my cup. "Oh, come on," he chuckled. "The bet. He bragged about it for weeks. Said he'd have you wearing his name in 6 months. The words froze me where I sat. What? What did you just say?" There was a pause on the line, then an awkward laugh. "Wait, you didn't know? I thought he told you by now. Forget I said anything. It was just stupid officers' club talk. A joke that got out of hand. But I wasn't laughing. My fingers went numb around the phone. The bet. Every smile, every gesture, every tender word Michael had whispered. Had it all been part of a game, I didn't wait for him to get back to the room. The moment I heard his keycard click in the lock, I was already standing in the center of the suite. My arms folded tight across my chest to keep them from shaking. Clara Michael's voice was light at first, but his smile faltered when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Tell me it's not true," his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath and said it louder this time. "The bet, Michael. Tell me, you didn't bet you could make me your wife in 6 months. The room seemed to shrink around us. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no sound came. And in that silence, I got my answer. I felt my stomach drop like the floor had vanished beneath me. Was any of it real? My voice cracked. "The flowers. The nights you stayed outside the hospital, just to hand me a book the way you looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Was it all just strategy? Clara, please," he said finally, his voice breaking. "At first, yes. I was proud and stupid. But then when I cut him off, my tears blurring his face. You kept playing until I fell for you, until I gave you everything." "No," he said hoarsely. "It stopped being a game long before you said yes. I love you. God, I love you." But I couldn't hear him over the pounding in my ears. I grabbed my bag and turned for the door. "Don't do this," he said, stepping toward me. "Please don't leave." I paused at the threshold, gripping the handle. "You should have told me before I gave you my trust." And then I walked out, leaving behind the man I thought I knew. And the pieces of my heart scattered across that perfect island. The rain was falling in Washington when I stepped out of the cab, the city's skyline gray and unforgiving. I barely remembered the flight home. Hours spent staring out the window, clutching my ring, like it might explain how I'd ended up here, married to a man who'd wagered on my heart. My apartment felt cold, foreign, like I didn't belong in this life anymore. I dropped my bag by the door and sank onto the couch, still in the dress I'd worn on Maui. The silence was deafening. I pulled my knees to my chest and let the tears come. First in quiet streams, then in choking sobs that left my throat raw. How could I have been so blind? I replayed every moment with him, the way he'd held my hand at Arlington the night he'd knelt with that ring, the gentleness in his eyes when I told him he'd be my first. Was any of it real? The thought cut deeper than his betrayal, because despite everything, part of me still loved him. And that was the cruelest truth of all. The test sat on the bathroom counter, its stark white plastic frame mocking me. I told myself it was stress. The sleepless nights, the tears, the way food had tasted like ash since I left Maui. But when the second pink line appeared, my breath caught in my throat. 2 lines. Positive. I gripped the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection. I was carrying Michael's child, the man who had shattered me. A sob rose in my chest, but I pressed a hand over my mouth to hold it in. What do I do now? The rain was coming down in sheets, drenching the streets of D.C. as I fumbled with my keys outside the apartment building. That's when I saw him. Michael. Standing there without an umbrella, his uniform soaked through water streaming down his face like it didn't matter anymore. I froze. "Clara," he said, his voice raw, almost breaking against the sound of the storm. "I know." My stomach twisted. He knows about the baby. I saw the headline this morning. I don't know how the press found out, but... He stepped closer, hands raised like I was a frightened animal ready to bolt. I had to come. I couldn't stay away. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't make this harder. I don't care about medals, about rank, about pride. None of it means a damn thing if I can't be here for you." His voice cracked. "For both of you." The words struck something deep inside me, but I turned away. I didn't know if I could ever believe him again. I told him not to come back. But the next morning he was there, standing awkwardly outside my apartment door, with a bag of groceries in one hand and a small stuffed bear in the other. "You shouldn't be lifting heavy things," he said softly when I opened the door. Let me at least do this much. I wanted to slam the door in his face. Instead, I let him in. At first, I kept my distance. I watched him from across the room as he unpacked vegetables and carefully folded baby clothes he'd brought. His movements were slower than I remembered, more deliberate, as if he was afraid one wrong step would shatter whatever fragile thread still tied us together. Over the next few days, he kept showing up. He painted the nursery walls in a pale sky blue, humming under his breath as he worked. When he was done, he stepped back paint on his hands and sweat at his brow and said, "I want this room to feel like peace." At the prenatal class, he sat in the back with me practicing breathing techniques and fumbling with a doll as he learned how to swaddle. The sight of his large hands struggling with the tiny cloth would have made me laugh once. Now it just made my chest ache. "Clara," he said one evening as he set down a folded onesie on the crib, "this isn't a mission to me anymore. It's my chance to be the man I should have been from the start. The father he deserves. The husband you deserve." I didn't answer. I couldn't, but for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to push him away. It was late. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the baby monitor I'd set up early, just for practice. I sat on the couch, hands resting on my belly, staring at the faint outline of the crib in the dim light. Michael was sitting on the floor across from me, folding tiny socks into neat pairs. He looked different. No uniform, no polished boots, just an old gray t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair slightly mussed. It felt almost normal. Then I felt it. A flutter. I froze. And then it came again stronger this time. "Oh," I whispered. "What is it?" His head shot up, worry flashing in his eyes. "The baby," I murmured. He kicked. Michael blinked. Slowly, carefully, he set the socks aside and moved closer. "Can I?" He stopped himself as if afraid to ask. I hesitated, then nodded. His hand was warm as he placed it gently over the curve of my stomach. For a moment there was nothing, and then another kick. Michael inhaled sharply, his fingers tightening slightly against my skin. "He's strong," he said softly, almost to himself. His voice broke a little, just like his mother. I didn't pull away. For the first time since Maui, I let myself close my eyes and breathe. I lay awake that night, listening to Michael's quiet breathing from the couch. He'd fallen asleep sitting up a baby name book still open in his lap. For weeks, I'd built walls around my heart stone by stone, convincing myself he didn't deserve a second chance. But tonight, as I watched him sleep, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion, his face softer than I'd ever seen, I felt one of those stones crack. Maybe forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. Maybe it's slow, a choice you make every day. And maybe, just maybe he was trying to become the man I once thought he was. I didn't know if we'd get there. But for the first time, I wanted to try. The contractions came hard and fast, stealing my breath as I gripped the edge of the hospital bed. Clara, look at me. Just breathe. Michael said, his voice low but steady, though I could see the fear in his eyes. I wanted to snap at him, tell him he didn't understand this pain, this terror, but then his hand closed over mine, strong and warm, and I let him anchor me. Hours blurred into an endless rhythm of pain and shallow breaths. You're almost there, the nurse said gently. One more push. I bore down with everything I had left, and then like the breaking of a storm, the sound of crying filled the room. Our son's first cry. I collapsed against the pillows, tears blurring my vision as they placed the tiny wriggling bundle on my chest. Michael stood frozen for a moment, his hand covering his mouth. Then he stepped closer, his face crumpling as tears streamed down his cheeks. He's perfect, he whispered hoarsely, reaching out to touch our baby's tiny fingers. I looked at Michael, this man who had broken me, and spent months trying to put me back together. And for the first time, I didn't see a general or a mistake. I saw a father. It was late when I found him in the backyard. The baby was asleep in his bassinet by the window, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady breaths. I'd gone to get a glass of water, but something drew me to the faint orange glow outside. Michael was kneeling by the fire pit, a folded piece of paper in his hand. "What are you doing?" I asked softly from the doorway. He looked up, startled, then gave me a small, almost timid smile. "This," he said, holding up the paper, "is the last remnant of the man I used to be." I stepped closer, my eyes catching on the faint words scrawled across the page. The officer's club logo at the top. The number 6 months circled in ink. The bet. I kept it as a reminder of my shame, he said. But I realized tonight, I don't need it anymore. Not if I want to be fully yours, fully his. I watched in silence as he struck a match, the flame flickering to life in his hand. He hesitated for a moment, then touched it to the corner of the paper. It caught quickly, curling black around the edges, until the words were swallowed whole. "It's over," he whispered as the ashes crumbled into the pit. "No more games, no more pride, only us now." The firelight danced in his eyes, and for the first time I believed him. It wasn't a grand gesture this time. No candlelit dinners, no orchestra playing in the background, just the quiet hum of the baby monitor and the soft golden light of our living room. Michael stood in front of me, nervous in a way I'd never seen before. In his hands was a small velvet box, worn around the edges, like he'd been holding it for days. "Clara," he began, his voice rough the first time I asked you to marry me. I was still wearing a mask. Still, half the man I wanted to be. He took a breath and dropped to one knee. This time, there's no rank, no stars, no pride. It's just me, a flawed man, asking the only woman he's ever truly loved to choose him again. Tears pricked my eyes. For a moment, I remembered all the pain, all the walls I'd built to protect myself. But I also saw the man who painted the nursery, stayed up through countless nights, holding our crying baby, and burned the very symbol of his betrayal. Slowly, I nodded. Yes. His shoulders sagged with relief as he slipped the ring on my finger. And when he looked up at me, his eyes weren't those of a general who'd won a battle. They were simply a man's eyes full of love and gratitude. As his arms wrapped around me, I felt the weight of the past start to slip away. The lies, the pain, the walls I'd built so high. They didn't vanish in an instant, but in Michael's embrace, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't about forgetting. It was about beginning again. Not as the general and the nurse, not as the betrayer and the betrayed, just as us. Michael rested his forehead against mine, his voice barely a whisper. No more masks, no more missions, only a life. With you. For the first time I let myself believe him fully, and as the baby stirred softly in his bassinet beside us, I thought, this is our homecoming, the place where all the broken pieces come together. 2 years. That's how long it's been since the night Michael knelt in front of me, not as a general, not as a man trying to fix his mistakes, but as the man I chose to love again. Now the medals are tucked away in a drawer somewhere. The stars on his shoulders have been replaced by flower smudges and crayon marks from our little boy's sticky fingers. Daddy Look Benjamin's tiny voice rings through the living room as he wobbles on unsteady legs, arms outstretched. Michael crouches low, his hands open. You've got this, champ. One more step. I watch from the kitchen doorway, my heart swelling as Ben takes another determined step before tumbling safely into his father's arms. They both laugh. Michael's deep and full, Ben's high and bubbling. It's a sound I never thought I'd hear in this house. Once I thought forgiveness was impossible, but standing here now in a home filled with warmth and toddler giggles, I know we didn't just heal. We built something better, something real. The afternoon light streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across the living room floor, where Michael and Ben sat cross-legged. In Ben's tiny hands was a wooden toy star, a gift from his father. Daddy, what's this? Ben asked, his big brown eyes full of curiosity. Michael smiled softly, running a calloused thumb over the star. It's a symbol, buddy. Some people wear stars like this on their shoulders to show they've led others, made hard choices, protected what's important. Ben's little brows furrowed, like you. Michael's gaze shifted, and for a moment I saw the man he used to be, the one who once believed stars were everything. Not anymore, he said quietly. You see, stars don't make you a hero. Love does. Being kind, honest, and brave for the people who count on you, that's real honor. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart tight in my chest. 2 years ago, this man had nearly lost everything because he thought pride was worth more than trust. Now he was teaching our son the lesson it had taken him a lifetime to learn. As Ben clutched the wooden star to his chest and giggled, Michael glanced up at me. Our eyes met, and in that simple look, I felt the echo of all we had survived the bet, the heartbreak, the tears, and the long road back to each other. Stars don't make a hero, I thought love does. And here, in this quiet house, with this little boy and this man who had chosen to change, I finally understood what home and honor truly meant. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the baby monitor and the faint crickets chirping outside. I sat on the couch, cradling a warm cup of tea, as Ben curled up beside me, his tiny fingers clutching his favorite stuffed bear. He had finally drifted off after a day of running barefoot through the yard, his cheeks still flushed pink from laughter. Across the room, Michael stood in front of the closet. Slowly, almost reverently, he ran his hand along the crisp fabric of his dress uniform before placing it on a hanger and sliding the door shut. No medals tonight, no stars on his shoulders, just Michael. When he turned back toward me, his face softened in the dim light. "You know," he said, lowering himself onto the couch next to me, "for years I thought the uniform was who I was. But it's not. This..." He nodded toward Ben's sleeping form, and then met my eyes. "This is who I want to be." I reached for his hand, letting our fingers entwine. It wasn't a grand declaration. It didn't need to be. In that quiet evening glow with the scent of baby shampoo still lingering in the air, I realized something. After everything, the lies, the hurt, the healing, we had arrived. Contentment wasn't loud. It was this: a home, a family, and the man who had finally learned to take off his armor. As I lay in bed that night, Michael's arm draped over my waist, and the steady sound of his breathing in my ear, I thought about how far we'd come. It wasn't perfect. Forgiveness never is. Some days the old pain still whispered at the edges of my heart, reminding me how easy it would be to close up again. But then I'd look at him, this man who burned his pride, traded stars for bedtime stories and midnight feedings, and I'd remember, love isn't a one-time decision. It's a choice. Every day we choose to stay, to trust, to begin again. Michael stirred beside me, his voice thick with sleep. "You okay?" I turned to face him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I am," I whispered. "We are." And in that quiet moment, with our son safe in his crib and our past finally laid to rest, I let myself believe it fully. Every day we choose, and every day we choose us.